The silence in Daniel Harper's house did not arrive all at once. It grew slowly, like a shadow stretching longer each day after Emily died, and by the time he noticed it fully, it had already settled into every corner of his life. Mornings were the worst because they reminded him that time was still moving even though his heart felt stuck on the day she passed. He woke before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the heater, and for a few seconds he always forgot. In those seconds, he expected to hear Emily moving in the kitchen or humming softly as she made coffee. But the silence always returned, heavy and final. Daniel was 43, a civil engineer living in a quiet suburb outside Seattle, and until a year ago, his life had been simple and full. Emily had been his balance, warm, patient, and quietly strong. They met in college, grew up together, built routines that felt permanent. Cancer broke those routines without mercy. The months of hospital visits, careful smiles, and unspoken fear had drained him, but losing her drained something deeper. After the funeral, people showed up with food, kind words, and hugs. Then they left. And Daniel remained, alone with rooms that still smelled faintly like her lavender soap. He tried to keep busy. He went back to work sooner than his manager expected, not because he was ready, but because sitting at home felt unbearable. At work, he could focus on numbers and plans, things that did not ask how he was feeling. But even there, grief followed him. He caught himself opening his phone to text Emily about his day, only to remember she would never read it. Nights were long. He ate simple meals, often standing at the counter, because sitting at the table felt wrong with only one chair filled. Sleep came in pieces. When it did, dreams brought Emily back just long enough to hurt him again when he woke. His sister, Laura, called often. She lived in Vancouver and worried about him more than she said. One evening, after hearing the tired tone in his voice, she suggested a local grief support group. Daniel almost said no. He was not someone who shared feelings with strangers. He believed grief was something to carry quietly. But after hanging up, he sat in the dark living room and realized he had not spoken out loud in 2 days. The quiet was starting to scare him. A week later, on a rainy Thursday evening, Daniel found himself driving to a community center near downtown. The parking lot was half full. He sat in the car longer than necessary, watching rain slide down the windshield, debating whether to leave. His chest felt tight, like he was stepping into something he could not control. Eventually, he forced himself out of the car. Inside, the room was simple, folding chairs in a circle, warm lights, a table with tissues and coffee. About a dozen people were there, all different ages, all carrying loss in their faces. Daniel took an empty seat and kept his eyes down. The meeting started quietly. A counselor spoke briefly, then invited people to share if they wished. One by one, voices filled the room with stories of sudden accidents, long illnesses, and empty homes. Daniel listened. He did not plan to speak. Hearing others talk made his throat tight, and he focused on breathing slowly. That was when he noticed her. Claire Morgan sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, listening with full attention to whoever spoke. She did not interrupt or rush to fill silence. When she did speak, her words were simple and honest. She talked about losing her husband, Mark, in a car accident 2 years earlier and how life had split into before and after. Her voice did not shake, but there was depth in it, like someone who had learned how to live with pain rather than escape it. Daniel felt something shift inside him, not attraction, not comfort exactly, but recognition. When the meeting ended, people stood, some hugging, some leaving quietly. Daniel planned to slip out unnoticed, but Claire caught his eye and gave a small, polite smile. It was nothing special, just kindness, but it stayed with him as he drove home. That night, the house felt different. Still quiet, but less heavy, as if the silence had cracked slightly. Daniel told himself it was just relief from being around people who understood. He was tired of pretending he was okay. Over the next few weeks, he returned to the group. Not every meeting felt meaningful, but going gave structure to his evenings. He noticed Claire more, not in a way that made his heart race, but in a way that made him feel steady. They spoke briefly after meetings, about simple things like traffic, weather, or how strange it felt when people stopped asking about the loss. Daniel appreciated that she never pushed him to talk more than he wanted. One evening, after a particularly heavy session, Claire mentioned a small cafe nearby that stayed open late. Daniel surprised himself by agreeing to join her. They sat across from each other, steam rising from their cups, and talked for nearly an hour. There was no flirting, no tension he could name, just ease. For the first time since Emily died, Daniel felt present, not trapped in memory or fear. On the drive home, he felt a sharp wave of guilt. He replayed the evening in his head, searching for something wrong. He had not crossed any clear line, but something inside him felt awake in a way he thought was gone forever. He whispered Emily's name in the empty car, unsure whether he was asking for forgiveness or reminding himself of who he belonged to. That night, sleep came more easily than it had in months, and that scared him more than the loneliness ever had. After that first coffee, Daniel tried to tell himself nothing had changed, but change has a way of moving quietly, and soon his weeks began to shape themselves around the support group without him planning it. Work stayed busy, deadlines stacked up, and coworkers treated him gently, but it was the evenings that shifted most. He no longer rushed home to an empty house. Instead, he stayed out later, sometimes walking downtown after meetings, sometimes sitting in his car just to delay the silence waiting for him. Claire became part of that new rhythm. They did not text often, and when they did, the messages were simple, but every meeting felt easier than the last. Daniel noticed how she always arrived early and chose a seat near the edge, how she listened more than she spoke, and how her presence made the room feel calmer. They began walking together after meetings, talking about everyday things, jobs, favorite movies, places they once wanted to travel with their spouses but never did. These talks were light, yet they carried weight, because they came from people who understood loss without explaining it. Daniel found himself thinking about Claire during the day, not in a romantic way at first, but as a steady thought, like a quiet reminder that someone else was walking a similar road. One Friday evening, after a long workweek, Claire asked if he wanted to join her for dinner at a small diner nearby. Daniel hesitated, feeling that familiar pull of guilt, but agreed before he could overthink it. The diner was warm and busy, filled with low conversations and clinking plates, and sitting across from Claire felt natural, almost normal. They talked faster this time, laughing more easily, and when Daniel realized he was smiling without forcing it, his chest tightened. He excused himself to the restroom, stared at his reflection, and felt shame rush in. Emily's face appeared in his mind, gentle but serious, and he wondered what she would think of him sitting here, laughing with another woman. The thought followed him back to the table, quiet but heavy. Claire noticed the shift in him and asked if he was okay. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The rest of the evening passed smoothly, but the weight stayed with him. At home that night, Daniel wandered into the bedroom and opened Emily's closet, something he rarely did. Her clothes still hung neatly, untouched. He pressed his face into one of her sweaters and breathed deeply, as if the smell might pull him back to the life they shared. Tears came, sharp and sudden. He whispered apologies to the empty room, promising he would never replace her, though he was no longer sure what that promise even meant. Over the next weeks, Daniel tried to create distance, skipping one meeting, then another, but the loneliness rushed back too quickly, and he returned. Claire did not ask where he had been. She simply welcomed him with the same calm smile. That kindness broke down his defenses more than questions ever could. One evening, the group discussed guilt, how it shows up after loss, how it hides behind routine and responsibility. Daniel surprised himself by speaking. He talked about feeling wrong for moments of peace, about feeling disloyal when life felt less painful. The words poured out faster than he expected. When he finished, the room was quiet. Claire met his eyes and nodded slightly, as if to say she understood completely. Afterward, they walked together in silence. Outside, the air was cold and clear, and streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Daniel finally spoke, admitting he was confused by his feelings and afraid of what they meant. Claire listened carefully and said she felt the same confusion once, when she first allowed herself to enjoy a conversation again after her husband died. She said healing did not come in straight lines and that warmth did not always mean intention. Her words settled something inside him, though they did not erase the fear. Their connection deepened quietly after that. They began meeting outside the group, walks in the park, shared lunches, short drives with the windows down and the radio low. Daniel felt alive in ways he had not felt since before Emily's illness, and that aliveness scared him. He kept boundaries, reminding himself constantly of who he had loved and lost, but emotions do not follow rules. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench watching leaves fall, Claire rested her hand briefly on his arm while laughing at something he said. The touch was light and innocent, but it sent a wave through him that left him breathless. He pulled away gently, standing up too fast, making an excuse to leave. Claire looked surprised but did not follow him. Daniel drove home with his heart racing, hands tight on the wheel, feeling like he had crossed an invisible line. That night, he dreamed of Emily standing in their old kitchen, watching him without anger, without sadness, only quiet understanding. He woke up shaken, unsure if the dream was comfort or warning. The next day, he avoided Claire's messages, telling himself he needed space. Days passed. The house felt heavier again. Finally, unable to carry the silence, Daniel agreed to meet her. He told her everything, his fear, his guilt, his sense that something was changing inside him that he did not know how to control. Claire listened without judgment and admitted she felt drawn to him too, not in a way that erased her past, but in a way that made her feel present again. They agreed to slow down, to respect the past while acknowledging the present. But as Daniel drove home that night, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. Something had already shifted, something he could not undo, and the warmth he felt around Claire was no longer just comfort. It was connection. And that realization followed him into the quiet house, waiting with him in the dark, asking questions he was not yet ready to answer. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the attic that had been long neglected, Daniel stumbled across a small, worn box tucked in the corner beneath old blankets and photo albums. The box had Emily's neat handwriting across the lid, for Daniel. His heart clenched as he lifted it carefully, dust rising into the air like memories. Inside were letters, folded and stacked, yellowed slightly with age, each one in Emily's familiar, looping script. Daniel sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, trembling, and opened the first letter. It began with her usual warmth, recalling small moments from their life together, quiet Sunday mornings. Trips to the lake, evenings spent cooking together. As he read, the memories flooded him, bittersweet and sharp, each word pulling him closer to the woman he had lost. Then came a line that stopped him completely: "If you ever feel warmth again, please don't push it away. Love does not replace love. It continues it." Daniel's hands shook, and tears blurred the words. She had written this long before he even knew he would meet Claire, before his heart had dared to feel light again. The next letters followed the same pattern: gentle reflections, small jokes they had shared, confessions about fear and hope. One described her own fear of leaving him behind, of him wandering through grief alone, yet in that same letter, she expressed a quiet wish that he would not let sorrow consume him entirely. Another, written closer to the end, said, "I know you'll feel guilty. You always do. But I want you to live. Even if it hurts me in memory." Daniel sat on the attic floor, overwhelmed by a mix of grief, love, and guilt. He had believed he was betraying Emily by letting himself feel alive near Claire, but the letters seemed to offer him permission to feel again. He realized Emily had thought ahead, had imagined a future where he might find warmth without her, and had already forgiven him for that future. The weight of it pressed on him, almost too much to bear, because love from beyond the grave was more powerful than he expected. He thought about Claire, her calm voice, her easy laughter, the way she made him feel human again, and his heart ached with both longing and fear. Reading further, Emily reflected on their life, on the ordinary, beautiful moments that made them, and her words carried a wisdom that shook Daniel to his core. She spoke about grief not as something to endure but as something to integrate, to live with, to allow light back into the heart without diminishing the past. Daniel's chest felt tight, as if the room itself were pressing in, yet at the same time, he felt a strange liberation. He had carried the idea of betrayal like a stone in his pocket, and now it was gone, replaced by clarity. Yet the clarity brought its own complications. He loved Emily still, he always would, but he also recognized a stirring in his heart he hadn't allowed himself to name. He could not ignore the truth. He was drawn to Claire, and that feeling was not disloyal. Sitting there, letters spread around him, Daniel realized he was on the precipice of a new chapter, one Emily had already imagined and sanctioned with her words. He read the last letter carefully, folded beneath the others, written in her delicate hand with a few lines that made him pause and hold his breath. Sometimes love's greatest act is stepping aside so someone else can finish the story. Daniel's mind raced. He had spent months fearing that moving forward, that allowing himself to feel warmth again, was a betrayal, but Emily's words reframed everything. She had thought about his life continuing after her, about his right to seek happiness, about the possibility that someone could help him feel alive again. The attic, dusty and dimly lit, felt almost sacred, as if her presence lingered in the air. Daniel sat back, letting the tears flow freely, the weight of guilt dissolving into understanding, and in that moment, he knew the next steps of his life were no longer about secrecy or fear. They were about honoring both the love he had lost and the life that still awaited him. The letters had given him permission to live, to feel, to step carefully into a connection with Claire without feeling that he was erasing Emily's memory. Yet at the same time, the discovery was a storm of emotion, relief, grief, longing, hope, all intertwined so tightly that he could hardly breathe. Daniel carefully placed the letters back in the box, closing the lid with reverence, and carried it downstairs. The house felt heavier with possibility, and as he sat in the living room later that evening, he thought about the walks with Claire, the conversations, the laughter, and the moments that had made him feel something he had not felt in months. The letters reframed his guilt, transforming it into understanding, and slowly, he began to feel a tentative sense of permission, a recognition that loving again did not diminish Emily but honored her in the truest way, by living fully. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, clutching one of her letters to his chest, realizing that the past and future could coexist. Emily had given him the most precious gift, the ability to embrace life again, even when it meant opening his heart to someone new. And in that realization, Daniel felt a mixture of grief and liberation, a soft ache and a gentle warmth that signaled a change had begun, one that would ripple through his life in ways he could not yet fully understand. The next evening, Daniel met Claire at a quiet park by the river, the air crisp with early autumn and leaves drifting lazily around them, signaling change both in the world and in his heart. He carried Emily's letters in his coat pocket, each one a reminder of what he had lost and what he had been given permission to feel. Claire greeted him with her gentle, familiar smile, and they walked together along the winding path, the sound of the water blending with the rustle of leaves beneath their feet. Daniel felt nervous, unsure how to start, but he knew he needed to speak the truth, to share the letters and everything Emily had said. He stopped on a small wooden bridge overlooking the river, Claire beside him, and opened the first letter, letting her read a few lines aloud. As her voice echoed Emily's words, Daniel felt an unexpected lightness, a sense that he was no longer carrying grief alone. He explained everything, his fear, the guilt, the way he had felt warmth again with her, and the letters that had reframed his understanding of love, loss, and moving forward. Claire listened quietly, her eyes full of empathy and compassion, never judging, only reflecting back his emotions with gentle acknowledgement. "I don't want to replace her," she said softly, "and I don't think that's possible. I just want to be someone who helps you feel alive again." Her words struck him like a revelation, freeing him from the heavy weight of imagined betrayal. They continued walking, speaking of memories, dreams, and the strange intersections between past love and present connection. Daniel realized that he could hold Emily in his heart without denying the warmth that Claire brought into his life. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the river in gold and orange, Daniel felt permission not only to remember Emily but to embrace life again, fully and without fear. Claire reached for his hand lightly, a gesture that carried comfort and quiet reassurance, and Daniel did not pull away. For the first time since Emily's passing, he felt balanced, his grief and hope existing together, not as enemies but as parts of a whole. Yet even in this moment of peace, the final letter, the one folded beneath the others, weighed on him. He had kept it unread until now, unsure if he could face her last words. Finally, he opened it, and Emily's handwriting revealed one last lesson. Sometimes love's greatest act is stepping aside so someone else can finish the story. Daniel's chest tightened, and a tear ran down his cheek as he read the line aloud to Claire. It was not sadness this time, but understanding, a deep recognition that Emily had thought of him, not in limitation, but in liberation. Her love had extended beyond death, giving him courage to accept life and love again. The realization washed over him in waves. Emily's memory would never fade, but he could honor her by living fully, by feeling warmth and connection without guilt. Claire squeezed his hand, and Daniel felt the weight of the past dissolve into a future that was not empty, but full of possibilities. They sat on a bench as darkness fell, the lights along the river casting reflections that seemed almost magical. Conversation dwindled to silence, comfortable and unforced, and Daniel understood that life could move forward while still holding on to the love that had defined him. That night, as he drove home, he felt a mixture of grief and liberation, knowing that he had stepped into a new chapter without leaving Emily behind. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt heavy. He placed the letters carefully on the bedside table and lay down, feeling both the ache of loss and the warmth of hope. For the first time in months, Daniel closed his eyes without dread, welcoming the idea that he could live and love again. The park, the letters, Claire's presence, and Emily's final words combined into a quiet revelation: love does not end, it transforms. And as he drifted into sleep, Daniel knew he was ready to honor Emily, embrace life, and allow a new story to begin, one written not in guilt or fear, but in courage, warmth, and the enduring power of love.